Okay, welcome YouTube. Today's video is going to be on atheism and RPGs. Specifically, this issue I'm addressing is for your sort of generic fantasy RPG, D&D, or various D&D clones. And the question is, in a setting like, say, your standard D&D campaign, not specialized ones where this becomes an issue, but just your, your standard pick it up and play, Greyhawk, Forgotten Realms, homebrew, whatever you're using there, campaign where you have clerics and you have gods, and you have all their various factions and followers. Is it possible for a player to truly, for a character, player's character, to be an atheist? Now, in the modern world, we have a lot. There's a big movement of agnosticism, atheism, more so than there has been historically. But in a fantasy world where you not only see these priests and the miracles they perform, but you actually see the work of the gods displayed, if not daily, as adventurers, still fairly often. How can you justify that character would be able to maintain the stance that there is no greater power, that there are no gods, there are no divine beings in his world? And now, in my own campaigns, generally, when I'm dungeon mastering, when I'm DMing, GMing, whatever, for these sort of like standard, the fantasy campaigns, I request that the player does mark down there on his character sheet, because it's got a little spot for it, what deity his character follows, whether he's a cleric or thief or any character, because it does a lot of things in the way that it gives you points for interaction. It gives you, it helps to define the character, and it helps me as the DM to come up with things for people to react. Maybe somebody comes along and there's a problem at the local temple of, let's just say, Palor. And let's say there's a bunch of members of the party that follow Palor, so it's and if they're fairly well known, maybe the priests go specifically to find them. So there's adventure hooks in it. On other issues, whenever a character has to be, let's say, resurrected from the dead, I generally hold this rule that if you get into that position, you've been killed and you have to be resurrected, even though it's going to cost. You have to find somebody who's capable of performing that spell, and then also someone who is willing to cast that spell on you, because it's not like you can show up, here's a dead body, dump it on the temple grounds, toss them a sack of gold and say, all right, make it happen. Because let's say a lawful good cleric of Palor, I don't think he's neutral good, but there's whatever neutral good cleric of Palor, he's not really going to want to bring back a chaotic evil follower of Loth or Weejas or who Erythnal, God of Slaughter, whatever. He's not going to be interested in helping facilitate this person's career of murder and and slaughter. So it's not necessarily that certain clerics wouldn't resurrect followers of other gods, although not just any god and not just any person. They have, has to be more behind who's going, that specific situation, who's going to get resurrected, than just bringing the guy in and with the cash in hand. So that's one of the reasons I generally that and just to help fill it out for a role, RP piece. to make the character more interesting, to make it more multifaceted, to give it one more layer, because especially a lot of people will just roll up characters, and the first time you're rolling up characters, it's just a number of stats. A lot of people that I've seen at games don't put any thought at all into the initial creation of their character. They don't really have an idea of who they are or where they're going with it. So it helps to sometimes spark that, like, okay, he's a fighter, and he's a typical fighter background, and he's specialized in a greatsword. That's really and that's the definition of their character. Well, you say, okay, well, what god does he follow? He's like, I don't know. It's just easy to say, what's the fighter god? I'm like, there isn't really a fighter god. There are gods of valor, justice, battle. But then even still, they have to look through, and it just gives them one more thing. And if not, it gives me one more thing, especially with a character who maybe isn't putting so much focus onto like the character, a player who isn't putting so much focus on the character, to draw some more of the character out. But going back to my original question, which was, is it possible to play an atheist in a fantasy setting where their acts of the gods are seen daily through the divine vehicle or of their followers and their priests? Or, I mean, is it just even possible? That's the question. Now, the only example I have of a character who was in one of my campaigns that this made any sense for, and it was similar to a character that I also played, but I just marked down somebody to have somebody on the list, was a psionicist who I would also say a psionicist, and I would say maybe like a mage. These are two people that have a lot of their own personal power, so they're not really invested in looking to someone else for assistance in matters of healing, in matters of prayer, or any of the other, any other facets of power that are accessible only through a god or through a god's interpreter, a priest. So, but the character in the campaign was a scion of some sort. I remember he might have been a wilder, but he was a psionic character, and he always used to like mockingly refer to the people, the priests and their gods. Was his way of saying it. And this was up until, I think he did require healing, and the big motivating factor of why he eventually, I think he wrote down Cord. Yeah, Cord became his patron god, and the reason for this was not that he had any sort of revelation as a character, but he did find out that if he became a follower of Cord, then when he went to the temple, he got a discount on services there. And the first service that he actually required was use of the temple for a marriage ceremony, which had a lot to do with a scheme involving posing as a noble. But he did eventually conform somewhat to the stereotype of a true believer of Cord. However, that still goes back to the question of whether it is even possible for a character, and not the player. The player can be an agnostic, atheist, whatever, I don't care. But for the character and in the setting, especially, to be an atheist or agnostic, whatever. Somebody who doesn't believe in the gods, even though there's proof daily staring them right in the face that these beings do exist. And that is my question for today. Okay. I think that's where I'll leave you. Thanks, YouTube, and we'll talk later.